In the year 1542, up at Hakoniai Pass, nestled in the mountains above the clouds, something strange and honestly a little disturbing was happening. In some hidden part of that place, people were tied upside down in the lotus position, suspended over a blazing fire. Basically, they were being cooked alive. While that horror show was going on, a group of people stood nearby watching like it was no big deal. They casually commented that the kids this year were all trash. Just straight up trash. But then one of them noticed something odd. One of the kids hanging over the flames wasn't freaking out. In fact, he looked calm. Dead calm. And not only did he survive, but he showed clear talent for fire release. That same kid? Yeah, he later turned into a full-on killer at a crazy young age, taking out tons of other ninjas, probably as part of some twisted test. Other onlookers couldn't help but be impressed. Apparently, this kid had already mastered all the known human ninja arts. Every single one. An old man who witnessed the whole thing grinned and said that the kid was definitely going to be the next clan leader. Fast forward to the year 1546, during the night battle of Kawagago. The battlefield was drenched in blood and full of death. Long ago in this country, there were people who operated in the shadows of history only to die silently. From the moment they were born, they were raised as prodigies, trained non-stop in arcane assassination techniques that would make anyone else cry. These warriors were called Husa Grass or sometimes Ra Disorderly, or even Hamari. Somewhere above all the chaos, a bird was seen flying freely through the sky, eventually landing gracefully on top of a massive building, silently observing the mess happening below. Inside that building, 3 ninjas knelt before their leader. The man praised their recent surprise attack, calling it magnificent. He informed them that their lordship was absolutely thrilled with the overwhelming victory. This man was Hojo, and he went on to explain that the lordship would reward them with stipends, basically salary and supplies. He said he expected great things from them, but truthfully he was mostly speaking to the one in the middle, the protagonist of this story. He simply answered, "At your command." After saying everything he needed to say and a little more, Hojo told them to leave. The 3 ninjas bowed and vanished in a blink. Just then, another figure emerged from the shadows behind Hojo. This man warned him not to trust them too much. He explained that the Fuma clan were different, even by ninja standards. They weren't just strong, they were borderline insane, shaped by brutal training. He described the battlefield as a gruesome pile of unrecognizable corpses. According to him, their ninja jutsu had evolved past normal techniques. But Hojo waved off the warning. He said the Fuma clan followed an unbreakable rule. They were sworn to serve the Hojo clan. If anyone broke that rule, it was instant death. He explained that the entire clan was basically tied together with those iron chains of loyalty. Then, while giggling, he called them wretched creatures and convenient tools. Jump to the year 1579, during the Battle of Hisagawa. An army of soldiers charged forward, ready to kill the enemy general. This was war. But when they reached their target, they didn't see an army waiting. They saw just one person. The general blinked, confused. In front of him stood a child. He actually stopped mid-charge and wondered what in the world a kid was doing on a battlefield. But the child, our protagonist, simply reached up and placed a hand on his mouth mask. Slowly he removed it. Then with an eerie calm he opened his mouth. And that's when it happened. Fire. Flames burst forth and wrapped around his entire body like a living inferno. This was no ordinary attack. This was jutsu. This was fire transformation. The fire spread all around, burning everything nearby with shocking ease. But that child wasn't alone. Hidden under the sand, the others had been waiting. And it looked like that fiery explosion was their signal. The moment they emerged, the enemy army suddenly found itself face to face with a small army of extremely dangerous little ninjas. To their opponents, these kids didn't look like children, they looked like demons that had crawled straight out of hell. And before the enemy leader could even say a word, the protagonist appeared from behind and crushed his head while casually aura farming. It wasn't a battle, it was a complete one-sided slaughter. Killing meant everything to the protagonist. He killed and just kept on killing. All for one reason, survival. Fast forward to the year 1613. Now bro is old as _. He's 80 years old, handcuffed, with bloody hands and missing a leg. The villagers marched him through the streets, putting him on display. Civilians stared and whispered, recognizing him immediately. They called him a monster. A demon. That year, Fumitaro had finally been captured by the __ shogunate. The Hojo clan, whom the Fuma had served for generations, had been defeated by Toyotomi Hideyoshi during the siege of Odawara. Their hidden village? Gone. Completely destroyed. Before his execution by decapitation, someone asked if he had any last words. But he didn't want anything. Not even a final sentence. The executioner smirked and said, "It seems even the great Fumitaro couldn't overcome sheer numbers." He also added that the Kuda of Ega and Koga still seemed useful. Whatever bro just said must have hit a nerve, because Fumitaro's death stare scared the living daylights out of him. Still, Fumitaro let it go. He was too old to care about how it ended. But deep down he wondered, why had he lived this long? He had never feared death. So what was keeping him here? As he looked up and saw a bird flying overhead, he wondered if the bird would live a long life, and if only he could live as freely as it did. The word free struck something deep within him. He remembered that since childhood he had always dreamed of freedom. He had lived all this time but never truly been free. At that very moment his head rolled off his shoulders. His eyes were still open when it happened. Then, out of nowhere, a massive red finger, seemingly from the gates of hell themselves, touched his forehead. A deep, eerie voice said it had chosen him. It claimed to be the one who sees the world through all things. Suddenly something began to glow. The voice told him he would live again. Everything went black. Then he opened his eyes. Slowly he saw baby hands, felt himself drenched in some gooey liquid. His whole body ached and he couldn't breathe. So naturally he used his fire transformation jutsu and completely exploded, releasing a burst of flames that destroyed the body of a dragon. Yeah, he had apparently been inside a dragon. Now reborn as a baby, he was beyond confused. The world around him was unfamiliar, filled with floating islands and all sorts of wild, otherworldly stuff. Because he just killed the dragon that ate him, its body crashed straight into a castle perched atop a giant tree, absolutely wrecking it. Meanwhile, standing on top of this massive creature, a tiny, fragile-looking figure slowly stood up. When Fumitaro looked ahead, he saw one of the most disgusting goblins I've ever seen. Apparently, Fumitaro knew these creatures. He called them demons. Down he stared up at the sky and saw yet another dragon flying by. He realized he was in a strange, unknown land. There were flying lizards and weird creatures all around. But suddenly he smiled. He got it now. He'd been reincarnated. After Kataro blasted straight through the dragon, someone below had been watching. She looked up and her eyes widened in shock. There was a baby falling from the sky. At that exact moment, Katara was overwhelmed with joy. The feeling was unlike anything he had ever experienced. In that instant, he embraced it fully, silently declaring to himself that he had been reborn. A refreshing wave of freedom washed over him, and from that point on he felt truly alive, like he was finally free. Nearly a century before, a hero named Arslan had defeated the demon lord alongside his 3 companions. He was celebrated as one of the 4 great heroes. They became legends. But times had changed. With the rise of a new demon lord, the strength of the demon kin had grown wildly. Much of the surface world was now claimed by the demon realm, marking the beginning of a new era, an age ruled by the demon kin. In the current time, a massive green creature towered over Kataro. Its huge foot had him pinned to the dirt. As it glanced down, it noticed the infant lying near its toes. Its eyes narrowed in confusion. A human child falling from the sky alongside a dragon? It didn't add up. This creature belonged to the goblin kin. Specifically, he was their leader, the king goblin. He scoffed at the bizarre sight and dismissed Kataro as nothing more than a weak, useless member of the human race. With a sneer, he kicked Kataro across the ground like garbage, sending the baby skidding until he flopped onto his back nearby. Suddenly, chaos erupted among the goblins. One of them shouted to the king that the Sky Goblin Castle had been completely destroyed. Another cursed their rotten luck and called the wreckage of their home unforgivable. Fueled by rage, the king goblin suggested they blow off some steam by killing the child. The other goblins cheered, clearly on board with the idea, their bloodlust rising. They got ready for a brutal execution. The king goblin didn't waste time. He raised his massive weapon and brought it down with all his strength, slamming it into the earth where Kataro lay. The goblins exploded with celebration, cheering over what they called a critical hit, shouting like it was the highlight of their day. But as the dust cleared, the king's expression shifted. His eyes narrowed. Somehow Kataro had dodged it. Inside, Katar let out a sigh of relief. He had barely escaped. The goblins stared, stunned. The baby had dodged. Looking down at himself, Katar tried to make sense of it. He thought babies had soft bones and couldn't even move properly. But somehow, despite the pain and struggle, he forced himself up. His legs shook, but he stood. The king goblin gawked in disbelief just before Kataro suddenly vanished. Then in a blink, Katar reappeared right on top of the king's head. he twisted the goblin's neck in a way that wasn't even remotely normal. No hesitation. He activated a move, ninjutsu, borrowed fire. Flames exploded around him and the king goblin, surrounding them both. The king howled in agony as the fire tore through his flesh. But Kotaro didn't let go. He held on tight, keeping the flames going like a stubborn stove on max heat. The rest of the goblins were frozen in shock. One of them just stood there, mouth open, trying to figure out how in the world a baby was casting magic that powerful. This wasn't some fancy fireball. No. This was something way above that, something next level. Meanwhile, the massive corpse of the dragon lay sprawled across the castle steps in the sky. The crumbling stairway led up toward the ruined structure, and the woman from earlier was slowly making her way up. As she climbed higher, something stirred within her, faint memories of the past. This place had once belonged to the Elfkin. The sight tugged at her heart, filling her with a quiet nostalgia. Her thoughts drifted to the baby, the one that had literally exploded out of the dragon's belly like some kind of violent magic trick. She was convinced he had to be here. Reaching the upper level, she paused and looked around, only to be met with a gruesome scene. Goblin bodies were scattered everywhere, torn apart like ragdolls in the hands of a storm. Her eyes widened in shock. Then she spotted him, Kotaro, lying on the ground completely drained, like a phone on 1% battery. She stepped toward him cautiously, her mind trying to wrap itself around the madness. Could that baby have really done all this? As she pulled back her hood, her expression slowly shifted from disbelief to something more tender. A glint of recognition flashed in her eyes. She whispered softly, saying that she had finally found it, a tiny flickering seed of hope. This woman was Hyrie Titania, one of the legendary 4 great heroes. At that moment, a memory flickered in Kotar's mind. He saw himself as a newborn, nestled in his mother's arms while his father stood beside them with a gentle smile. Confusion filled him. Was this real? Then the image of his old village emerged, once hidden and peaceful, now reduced to ash and ruins. The smoldering ground whispered of a massacre. Amid the destruction, only one tiny baby had survived the firestorm. He remembered the attackers' voices, commenting on the miracle or perhaps the stubborn will of a ninja. The memory continued to unravel, and Kotar heard his own voice echo in his head. He questioned if those really were his memories. Ever since he'd been brought to the ninja village, he'd been told he had no parents. He'd grown up believing that the only person he could rely on was himself. So why now? Why was this vision resurfacing? As his consciousness returned, he slowly opened his eyes and found himself staring up at a beautiful, curvy woman who was peering down at him. The realization smacked him in the face. He had been reincarnated as a baby. His mind spun. Who was she? A native of this strange new world? The woman gently wrapped him in her cloak, laid him down on a smooth rock, and then knelt in front of him. She introduced herself as Hyrie Titania and greeted him by his actual name. That made his eyes twitch. How the heck did she know his name? She admitted she had peeked into his memories and apologized for doing it without his permission. Kotar's brain went into panic mode. What kind of crazy ability let someone see memories that deep? What kind of hack was she using? With a soft voice, Hyrie asked if she could stay by his side. She acknowledged that he was just a baby, physically anyway, and said she'd be happy to help however she could. Kotar didn't respond immediately. His eyes narrowed slightly. Help. He didn't trust that word. What was her angle? But in the end he decided it didn't matter. If she tried anything funny he'd kill her. No hesitation. Just because he was trapped in a baby's body didn't mean he'd play nice. In this strange world he'd use whatever he could. With that decision he flashed her a sharp, knowing smile. Hyrie's heart practically melted. Overcome with emotion, she threw her arms around him in a tight hug, cradling his tiny body. She promised she'd do her absolute best to support him. Her joy bubbled over, but in the process she accidentally smushed Kotar's face right into her chest. His cheeks lit up like a warning light. She quickly apologized, flustered, explaining that she was just super happy and couldn't resist how adorable he looked when he smiled. Even wrapped in her warmth, Kotar stayed alert. Was this a trap? Was she trying to manipulate him? But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't sense any bloodlust from her. It didn't add up. She didn't act like anyone he'd ever met. Could someone like this really exist? He shook off the thought. No, he couldn't afford to trust anyone, not fully, not yet. Kindness, it was dangerous, a weapon in disguise. That's how they got to you. That's how they tamed you, broke you, turned you into their obedient little pet. But not this time. Not in this life. He wouldn't suppress who he really was, ever again. As long as his heart remained in chains, he'd never taste true freedom. With that final thought, his body relaxed, his mind faded, and Hyrie, still watching him closely, whispered softly that he had pushed himself too hard and deserved to rest. Katar could barely keep his eyes open as sleep began to overtake him. He admitted to himself that part of the reason was his tiny baby body. But ever since he'd arrived in this strange new world, there had been an odd sense of comfort around him. It had been a long time, maybe too long, since he had felt this at ease while falling asleep. The ever-present killing intent that used to surround him had completely vanished. As he rested in Hyrie's lap, she looked down at him with gentle eyes. She whispered softly, telling him he wasn't alone anymore, that she was now by his side. A flashback then revealed how Hyrie had first come across him. When she had reached the Sky Castle, the aftermath of a violent clash lay before her. Goblin corpses were scattered everywhere, each one clearly taken down by Katar. Stunned by the scene, she wondered aloud who could have possibly done this. Her curiosity led her to place a finger gently on the baby's forehead and cast a memory-reading spell. As the spell activated, Katar's memories flowed into her mind. She saw everything: his childhood among ninjas, the cold glares thrown his way, the suffocating killing intent that haunted even his sleep. But even as a child, Katar had never been caught off guard. She witnessed him take down assassin after assassin with terrifying precision. His execution flashed before her eyes, followed by a fierce, desperate battle against the Goblin King. After the massacre, he had sat alone on the floor, a dark, dangerous look clouding his face. Every trial, every betrayal, every lonely moment played out before her, and as those memories poured in, Hyrie found herself in tears. She held Katar close, a storm of emotions swirling inside her. To live a life where one had to bury every feeling just to survive, that was the path of the ninja. A single mistake and they'd be consumed by the demon kin. Yet even with all he had endured, there was something in this child's heart that hadn't died. A glimmer of light. Despite the isolation, Kataro had never given in to despair. He hadn't let his heart turn dark. It was the heart of a true hero. In this new life, she silently wished he could finally know what love felt like. He wasn't alone anymore. As she sat quietly on a nearby rock, something horrifying happened. The Goblin King began to rise again. His body was torn apart, limbs twisted in unnatural directions, yet he stubbornly forced himself to stand. Disbelief warped his features as he stared at the child. The idea that a mere baby, had done this to him was something his mind couldn't accept. Rage surged through his broken frame as he prepared to attack once more. But just then Katar stirred in Hyrie's arms. His eyes snapped open, locking onto the Goblin King with a piercing glare. Without hesitation he raised one tiny hand. In a single effortless move, he erased the Goblin King from existence. The attack he did was so unbelievably powerful that mountains behind them got all destroyed. Hyrie didn't even notice what had happened. She remained still, cradling Kataro, who had already fallen back asleep like nothing had happened. Time passed in silence until something moved above them in the sky. Hyrie's eyes narrowed. A flying creature was watching them. Acting quickly, she cast the spell Air Ren, bringing the creature crashing down. As it fell, she swiftly threw her cloak over herself, panic creeping into her expression. Her thoughts raced. Had they been found by the demon kin? There was no time to hesitate. If you've made it this far, please step forward and press the button now. Open your eyes, step forward and push the button. Yes, you'll see what a thrill, what a rush that was. Now I want you to do something else for me. Please press the subscribe button. Come on, give it a try. Can you feel it? The glow of comfort, even in the face of crushing despair, must already be sweeping through your body. And in fact, can I say that I do believe commenting, "Let him cook," will lend you an air of charisma as well. The safest route out of the demon realm had been through the former forest of the giant tree. But now the only option left was the dreaded Great Rotwood Forest. Meanwhile, in a faraway location, Hyrie's image was being projected through a magic spell. A deep, echoing voice reported her movements. Inside a dark chamber, 10 shadowy figures stood in silence around a massive mystical eye that glowed with eerie light. The voice continued its report. Hyrie Titania, the Fairy King, had been found. A soft, amused chuckle came from the demon lord himself. One of the shadowy figures expressed surprise that she was still alive. Another scoffed and dismissed the report as useless, saying she had lost her former power. Some agreed without hesitation. But then the image changed, revealing the baby in her arms. That was what truly caught their attention. The scene played of Kataro battling the Goblin King, slicing through goblins like paper. The room fell into a tense silence. One of the voices finally spoke, asking the question they were all wondering, "Is that really just a baby?" Another one simply giggled. And then the demon lord gave his command. 10 demons were to kidnap the baby and kill the elf. The 10 figures responded in perfect unison, accepting the order without hesitation. A massive explosion ripped through the forest, signaling the beginning of the chaos. And just like that, the scene shifted once again. Hyrie was now sprinting through dense woods, branches whipping past her as demons chased her without mercy. She muttered curses under her breath. There were just too many of them. In her arms, baby Kataro's eyes sparkled with excitement. The terrifying, enormous creatures behind them didn't scare him at all. In fact, he looked more amazed than anything, filled with curiosity. Hyrie, trying to catch her breath, warned him not to get too excited. If he fell now, they wouldn't stand a chance. They were hopelessly outnumbered, and the only option left was to keep running. Suddenly, creatures dropped from the trees above, catching her off guard. But she didn't hesitate. With perfect timing, she unleashed the Grand Air Rupture spell, blasting the enemies out of the sky. The monsters exploded midair, and Katar, still safely cradled in her arms, watched in awe. He had never seen ninjutsu like that before. This girl was seriously impressive. But before Kotaro could even finish the thought, a much larger beast came swooping down from above. Hyrie looked up, her face twisting in fear as she realized the danger wasn't over yet. Panic took hold. She clutched Kotaro tighter, blaming herself for not being strong enough, wishing she still had the power she once possessed. Meanwhile, Katar's face was the total opposite. He looked thrilled as the huge creature lunged toward them. Just then, a group of small, winged, fairy-like beings appeared in the sky, placing themselves between the monster and the pair. One of the tiny creatures floated up to the beast and declared boldly that the prey belonged to them. The beast suddenly froze, then turned and fled without another sound, disappearing into the forest. Katar's eyes went wide again as he stared at the mysterious newcomers. One of the fairies turned toward them and zipped closer, its cheerful appearance twisted into something wicked, revealing a demonic face filled with contempt. It called Hyrie a filthy elfin and accused them of trespassing. Hyrie remained calm, cautiously observing them. Her thoughts were steady now. She knew this was a path she could no longer avoid. Katar, on the other hand, looked at the fairies with pure fascination. His eyes sparkled as he admired their strengths. But the fairies didn't return the friendly curiosity. They began shouting, calling Hyrie a bothersome elfkin and demanding she hand over the baby so they could eat her. Before they could act, Kotaro suddenly launched forward with lightning speed. He stuck his fingers between the thighs of the stunned fairies. Their reactions were instant. One let out a confused yelp, another screamed in horror, and one loudly accused him of being a pervert. Their faces turned bright red as they stumbled back in total shock. Hyrie gasped when she realized Kotaro had slipped from her arms. She tried to warn him. These weren't just some weak forest creatures. They were dangerous. Provoking them was a terrible idea. But Katar was still smiling, clearly having the time of his life. He shouted with excitement, calling the inchling flying beings so cool. And when Hyrie looked at him, something changed inside her. That pure, innocent smile, it filled her heart with happiness. Seeing Katar like this, truly free for the first time in his life, made everything worth it. One of the fairies growled in rage, calling him a ridiculous brat and threatening to paralyze him. A green thorn started forming in its mouth, and in the next instant, it launched the thorn straight at Katar. Hyrie's eyes widened. She recognized the attack. It was a poison needle. The rest of the fairies joined in, shooting more thorns his way. But Katar moved faster than anyone could follow. He caught the incoming thorns using both his hands and feet, stopping the attack completely. The fairies froze, terrified. Then he met their eyes with a sharp, menacing glare, and without a word, he threw the thorns back at them. Each one hit its mark, piercing the fairies' tiny bodies. Their screams echoed through the trees as they dropped to the ground, defeated. One of the dying fairies, barely clinging to life, muttered in disbelief that those movements weren't human. Kotaro landed softly, the intensity in his face fading. The thrill of battle was gone now, replaced by something cold and focused. Kotaro couldn't help but react whenever he felt killing intent. It always ruined his good mood. Right after, as if the battle hadn't even tired him, he just thought to himself how sleepy he was. Suddenly, a massive thorn came flying straight at him. But before it could land, Hyrie grabbed him and made a run for it. Blood spilled from a fresh wound. She had taken the hit while protecting him. Qatar looked up at her, eyes wide, the reality hitting him all at once. Hyrie stumbled and collapsed, shaking as blood poured from her side. She gritted her teeth, cursing that the thorn had only grazed her but still hurt like hell. A laugh rang out, faint and mocking, from one of the fairies lying on the ground. Just then, a huge creature began approaching from the distance. The fairy, barely conscious, warned them in a smug tone, their mama was coming. Out from the shadows came a massive and far more sinister fairy-like being. Her presence loomed over the bleeding Hyrie. With a voice that carried both familiarity and mockery, the creature called out her name. Hyrie's eyes widened in disbelief. It was Elva. Elva, now the fairy king, sneered and demanded that Hyrie hand over the baby. Her eyes sparkled with ambition as she declared that, after killing Hyrie, she'd finally earned the title of one of the 10 demons. Hyrie could hardly believe what she was hearing. Elva joining the demon kin? It was almost impossible to accept. Before she could say anything, Elva let out a roar and shut her up. Then, in the most bizarre way possible, Elva began pulling a weapon from deep inside her throat. Once the weapon was out, Elva made it clear she wasn't taking orders from the elfkin anymore. She launched her attack with no warning. Hyrie barely dodged the blast, tearing through the forest and obliterating a tree behind her. Elva cackled, praising Hyrie's survival, but explaining that the venom in her attack could melt through anything. She promised the next strike would end everything. Hyrie hit the ground hard, but her resolve only burned brighter. She refused to hand Kataro over. Still holding him tightly, she looked down at him and Qatar stared back, dazed but safe. Without a second of hesitation, Elva called out her next move, Fairy King's Grand Sword Dance. A massive explosion followed, ripping through the land. But just before it could reach Hyrie, Qatar lifted one tiny finger, and the entire attack froze in place. A strange feeling washed over him. In his head, he admitted it, he couldn't just leave this girl to die. Elva stared, stunned. The baby had stopped her ultimate attack with a single finger. Suddenly, it all made sense. Now she understood why the demon kin wanted him so badly. He wasn't a normal baby at all. Qatar, meanwhile, sighed in his thoughts. His body had no stamina, but for a technique like that, it was just enough. And so, he launched a counterattack, Njutsu, Finger Sever. The move cut right through Elva's body. Blood gushed from her mouth as she staggered backward, unable to believe what just happened. Before Kataro could finish her off, Hyrie stepped in and begged him to stop. She didn't want Elva to die. Elva, still barely standing, asked why she would spare her. Hyrie answered without hesitation, she wanted to save her. Kataro looked up at Hyrie as she started to speak about the past. She explained how the elfkin and fairykin once lived peacefully together in the forest, a beautiful place known as the Forest of the Giant Tree. The Elf King and Fairy King had formed an alliance. The Elfkin ruled with wisdom, while the Fairy King protected their land with strength and numbers. But that alliance wasn't as pretty as it seemed. The Fairykin had been seen as lesser beings, uncivilized and unintelligent. Over time, that unfair treatment turned to hatred. War broke out. Hyrie had been just a child, helpless to stop any of it. Listening, Qatar thought back to his past life. It was the same in every world. There were always those who used and those who got used. And now, here was this girl, so young, yet so full of fire and conviction. When Hyrie revealed that the war had happened only 150 years ago, Katara was completely taken aback. Was this girl older than him? What kind of strange world was this? Elva, however, dismissed Hyrie's words without a second thought. She called the story an old tale that rotted the ears. As she spoke, she began to transform. The poison, she claimed, should have already spread through Hyrie's body. She looked ready to kill her, ready to bring peace to the regrets of the fairy kin by ending the life of a princess. Hyrie desperately tried to stop her. She cried out that this conflict was meaningless, that it would only bring destruction. But Elva wasn't having it. She screamed that this was her mission. Once, during the war, she too had been a princess. And now, with both of them as surviving royals, she believed their meeting was fate. To fulfill that destiny, she had to kill Hyrie. In a flash, the magic rune around Elva's neck lit up. Hyrie instantly recognized it. It was a contract seal. Her heart dropped. Elva had made a pact. Elva confirmed it with no shame. They were in the same position, so Hyrie should understand. The power running through her now had been gifted by the demon lord himself. That's when a memory bubbled to the surface, one from their childhood. Hyrie had turned to Elva with quiet sadness in her voice, and asked why conflict never seemed to end in their world. She spoke about the human kin, demon kin, beast kin, how everyone was just trying to live. She even mentioned the elfkin and fairykin, saying she hoped that one day. Elva, smiling softly back then, had assured her that the forest would be fine. Her words had made Hyrie's eyes sparkle with quiet hope. Elva reminded her that they had always been friends and nothing could change that. Hyrie had frozen at the warmth in that moment, then smiled as the thought echoed in her heart. Yes, they would always be friends. Back in the present, Elva was still mid-transformation. Her voice rose with manic energy as she declared the overwhelming power surging through her. It was the power of the demon kin, bestowed by the demon lord himself, and it was all, she said, for the purpose of killing Hyrie. Watching her old friend change so drastically, Hyrie felt her heart sink. The contract seal confirmed it. A horrifying thought raced through her mind. What had Elva done? By accepting the seal, she had become nothing more than a tool for the demon king. Hyrie had saved her power for one person alone, but for Elva's sake she was ready to use it now. Suddenly Elva burst out laughing, mocking Hyrie for being too scared to even speak. Then she screamed, telling her to die, and unleashed a devastating technique. Fairy King's Grand Sword Dance, Crucifix. A massive explosion shattered the land, shaking the earth beneath them. Elva's laughter rang out across the destruction, wild and victorious. She declared that she had crushed Hyrie to pieces. But then, magical energy began to surge violently from the impact zone. A glowing sphere of energy formed at the center, and from it, Hyrie emerged. Her form had changed. Majestic, angelic wings unfurled from her back as she released the power she had kept sealed away for so long. Elva was stunned. The magical pressure crashing against her was more than anything she could comprehend. This level of power, it shouldn't have been possible. Hyrie was supposed to have lost her strength ages ago. How could she still stand? With calm precision, Hyrie began casting spells. First, a full status ailment recovery spell. Then a stamina restoration spell. The wounds all over her body healed instantly. Meanwhile, Kotaro, cradled in her arms, started to stir. He felt light, like a heavy sleep had been lifted. Confusion washed over him as he tried to make sense of what was happening. Elva's eyes widened in disbelief. A high-level spell? This power, it could only be the magic Hyrie had once wielded, when she was known as the Great Sage Hyrie Titania. Hyrie's magic continued to glow with radiant strength as she raised a hand and pointed at Elva. Her voice, firm yet filled with compassion, declared her intention to save her. She cast freezing sacred stigmata. A bolt of powerful magic tore through the air and struck Elva square in the chest. The demonic energy that had corrupted her began to unravel, dissolving in wisps as she stood frozen before Hyrie. Hyrie then spoke gently but clearly. She told Elva that she was no longer bound by anything. That there were things more important to protect than the regrets of their people. Because above all else they were friends. Tears welled up in Elva's eyes. The memories came rushing back. Hyrie too remembered a moment from over 100 years ago. They had lost the war. That should have been the end of it. So why now? Why had everything gone so wrong? And Elva remembered too. The moment it had all changed. When she listened to those voices and let herself be led astray. Now back on his feet, Kotaro reached out his hand toward Elva. Hyrie did the same, both of them extending their arms toward her. Elva, caught off guard by Kotaro's bright, radiant smile, hesitated for a moment, then slowly reached out in return. But just before their hands could touch, a violent force came crashing down from above. A figure dropped like a meteor, slamming into Elva and mercilessly driving her into the ground. Kotaro stood frozen, eyes wide, unable to process what had just happened. The attacker, the one who had just crushed Elva, glared at the scene with pure disdain. Receiving a bestowal seal from the demon lord only to end up like this, she said. Unforgivable. What a boring ending. It was Oppo, one of the 10 demons, standing proudly atop Elva's crumpled form, laughing wildly. The twisted joy in her expression made it clear. Watching her enemies suffer like this brought her nothing but bliss. Hyrie's power suddenly surged. Her anger exploded at the sight of Elva lying motionless beneath Oppo's feet. Meanwhile, Kotaro still hadn't moved, his shock anchoring him to the spot. Oppo kept smirking as she looked down at Elva. She casually remarked that the transformation caused by the contract seal was going out of control. Something, she said, that someone like Elva clearly wasn't capable of handling. Fueled by rage, Hyrie didn't hesitate. She channeled even more energy, activating a teleportation spell. In an instant, in a flash of light, she teleported both Kotaro and Elva to her side. Without wasting a second, Hyrie unleashed one of her strongest spells, the Karmic Inferno Annihilation. A colossal blast of energy erupted from her hand, ripping through the battlefield in a thunderous explosion. The entire area shook, the sky itself flashing with the aftershock. When the dust finally began to settle, Hyrie was seen floating in the air, panting heavily from the energy she had spent. Elva remained unconscious beside her, gently drifting in the air, while Kotaro hovered nearby, his face twisted in rage. But even after all that, Appa was still there, standing in the exact same spot, completely unharmed. She coughed once, lightly brushed some dirt from her shoulder and casually complained, "You really, that blast was so rude. Look at the mess on my clothes."